Welcome to the Business Development Podcast, brought to you by the Global Business Development Association, delivering the strategies and tactics to boost your career and corporate growth.
Hello, BD Pros, and welcome to the Global Business Development Association's podcast called What is Business Development? And today we're going to talk about following the rules. And look, business development is perhaps the best game in the world, and you play it with some of the most amazing people. But you have to know the rules, just like any game. You have to know the rules. And rules are necessary for a functional society, but many rules we follow are simply conventional wisdom, norms, or limited interpretations. We're expected to play along by conforming, following the crowd, and steering toward comfortable paths. But viewing rules as a starting point rather than as an endpoint opens worlds of opportunities for your success. And if you're looking for a field manual to tell you how to do that, well, we have Dr. Lauren Wittenberg Weiner on the podcast today, an amazing author, a business leader. And let me tell you a little bit more about this book. Unruly is a manual to identify your best maneuvers in the gray areas that allow you to authentically create and secure your own path to success. Lauren's a powerful speaker and a business leader who has upended barriers on her journey toward extraordinary success. And she teaches and mentors folks to understand how to navigate your own space within the rules while remaining in compliance and maintaining a strong moral compass. And build comfort around fear and imposter syndrome and turn those into your superpowers. And determine when it's time to stop listening to what people think you should or could do to find what you can do. And use your power to be a gateway, not a gatekeeper, for others. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our highly esteemed guest. She sold her company that was over $100 million in annual gross revenue. And every day of building that company, she still woke up most days wondering if she was actually doing it right. And, she spent 18 years growing her company, WWC Global, from a scrappy team of military spouses into a 350 plus person company that supported Navy SEALs, Green Berets, the State Department, Homeland Security, and more. They didn't just survive the government contracting world, they outplayed it by knowing the rules better than anyone else and finding new space within those rules along the way. When everyone told them it couldn't possibly be right. And in doing what they were doing, the four words that fueled Lauren's success more than any others were, "Oh, really? Watch me." So now she's turned that same unruly mindset to helping other people making their way on their own path and to their own breakout success. Whether you're in the Panini generation caring for everyone else but yourself, a founder wondering if you're doing it right, or someone who looks like she has it all and still feels lost, like some of those business developers listening here today, we often suffer from imposter syndrome. Lauren's here to help you get a little unruly, to redefine what success looks like, say the quiet parts out loud, and win without losing yourself in the process. She speaks, writes, and shares to spark meaningful change because real leadership starts with honesty, empathy, and a bit of fire. So, folks, let's get unruly together and welcome Dr. Lauren Wittenberg Weiner to the show. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony.
So, Lauren, thank you for sharing a copy of your book with me. I loved every bit of it. I did not find it insufferable at all.
Good. My dad actually kind of inspired me to get a little less insufferable.
Yeah, well, I read that part of your book where you sent an advance copy to your father and he gave you his candid advice when he said, that you're going to be competing with a lot of other insufferable authors. And you asked if it was insufferable. And his, I think, quote was, oof.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he just looked at me. Actually, the oof was mine. He just looked at me and was like, I'm like, thanks, Dad.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I gotta Gotta love parents to give you the candid feedback.
I'd rather get it from him than from other people. So, and I'd rather get it before we actually release the book. So I'm good.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, listen, you wrote this book. I loved every bit of it because you shared a lot of your stories too, which is great. Because sometimes you read some of these books and they're either written in the fictional style, which I can't follow, or the nonfiction style that is very dry.
Right.
And so what you do is you weave in these personal stories that really help illustrate the key points from your book. And I really liked hearing about your journey, but I would love for the audience to hear a little bit about your journey and what really drove you to write the book.
Yeah. So like you said in the intro, I started the company because I was a military spouse who found myself after working in the White House for 4 years. I found myself on my husband's military orders. He was on invitational orders. He was civilian, not active duty, had been active duty before. But I found myself on his military orders to Italy. And they told me that military spouses couldn't have jobs above a certain professional level. And I didn't do well with that. They actually told me I could be a secretary until I got pregnant, which I really didn't do well with. And so I started the company really just to get some work back to the States until I could find my way back to a real career again. And instead, it kind of took off, and it took off really because we got our first contract. Somebody saw me and said, "Hey, wait a second. How did Tony get you? I want another one of you." And, it was okay. Well, there's a lot of smart military spouses on the base. So we just started growing kind of organically from the first, really within 2 weeks of getting our first contract, we had another contract and then another one and then another one after that. So, we were able to grow quickly just on the strength of the reputation that we had and the relationships that we were building. And then, like you said in the intro, we grew the company from 0 to 15 million, at 15 million when we were coming out of size status. We realized we had to really grow big, and we went and got ourselves we said we wanted a really big contract. At the time, I defined it as maybe 20 million total contract value. And instead we got a $200 million total contract value contract, which really kind of took us to the next level. So we went from 15 to 50 million. And then we went within the next couple of years from 50 million to 100 million in annual revenue by doing a couple of things really right. And then we sold. And so we sold just about 3 years ago now. And as we were looking at the sale, just post sale and kind of, I now don't have the CEO title. I'm now not, quite as busy as I've been for the last 18 years. I sat and kind of thought, well, what got me here, right? How did we get to this place, which is never where we intended to get to, I certainly never intended to start a company in the first place, much less grow it to $100 million annual revenue. How did we get there? And what finally I wrote a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot, just kept writing, really, honestly, more so for therapy for myself than anything else. And then I kind of sat and looked at it, and I had an editor who was amazing. And we sat together and looked at it, and we said, okay, it was the rules, and it was knowing the rules better than anyone else, really getting a handle on those rules, but then taking that and finding the gray area within the rules where somebody would say, when we first started the company, somebody said, "Oh, you can't hire military spouses overseas. It's against the status of forces agreement." So I went back to the sofa and said, "Okay, is it?" And the answer was no. The answer was there's nothing in the SOFA that is either prohibitive or permissive. It's agnostic. So let's go through and see. Okay, the SOFA itself is agnostic. The regulatory structure is agnostic. The policy is agnostic. Even the process is mostly agnostic, except there was a form that didn't have a checkbox that said military spouse. So I took the liberty of redoing the form for them, making the form fillable so that it was easier, and just adding the checkbox there, and handed it to them and made it easier for them to say, yes, you can do this, than it was to say, no, you can't. And that was kind of our trick throughout, was knowing the rules, finding the space within the rules, and then when the rules no longer worked, figuring out how to change the rules. So the book is kind of structured in that 3-part sense of know the rules. How do you understand the rules? How do you know the rules? How do you find them? How do you challenge the rules? And then how do you change the rules when they no longer work?
Yeah, I love how you divided the book into those 3 fundamental concepts, and I'd love to dig into those in a minute. But I did want to touch on kind of this overarching strategic view that you have, which is you view everything in life as a game. I mean, life is the ultimate game.
Yep.
And so I, you approached it from an outsider's perspective. You were, refused the opportunity to work directly in a more senior position because of supposed rules. Growing up as the smallest kid on the playground, I learned very quickly. You learn the rules. You learn where the pack is, and you learn to stay out of the middle of the pack because you're just going to get trampled.
Yep.
And you really have to understand where the edges are. And that's what your book helps people understand. But what really resonated with me as kind of this overarching strategy is where you talked about blue ocean strategy versus red ocean strategy. And I loved how you coined this term, black ocean strategy. And I think a lot of people have heard blue ocean strategy, but if you can kind of, in your own words, talk about each one of those oceans, if you will.
Yeah. So Marylebone and Kim, which is the kind of traditional blue ocean strategy, kind of seminal document or seminal book, talks about blue ocean and red ocean, right? And I kind of changed that into red water and blue water, and you'll understand why in a second. But the red ocean is red because it's scrummy, right? Everyone is there. It's bloody because everyone's fighting battles. And when you think of it from a military context, it's really where all of the warships are, right? And so there's blood in the water. Whereas if you can sail into completely open ocean, that ocean is still blue water. So Marylebone and Kim came out right around, gosh, we were maybe 5-6 years into the firm, and I had read the book. And then I also read Eric Prince's book, Civilian Warriors, I want to say was the title of the book. And Eric Prince was Blackwater at the time, and then Z, and then whatever the heck else they were called. But that book was one of these. I read it. I remember reading it back and forth on an international flight and audibly gasping throughout the entire flight because he was so open about the rules. Like, he would say these weren't really rules, and I'm like, no, but they are, right? They're absolutely rules, and you're just flouting them with impunity. And so what I realized is there are people who go into what looks like blue ocean or blue water, but it is so far, it's open and not competitive because you've crossed the boundary into rule breaking. And so I called that Blackwater, because Blackwater. But so I look throughout the book in red water, blue water, and black water, and we're trying to stay away from both red water, where it's scrummy and everyone's competitive, but also black water, where you're crossing boundaries, where you're crossing lines and breaking rules, and find your way into the blue water, which is truly viable, truly moral and ethical and legal paths that aren't in a competitive environment.
Yeah. Look, business developers, we're often the smallest kid on the playground, and we're looking to stay away from the pack because the competition is fierce.
Yes.
And oftentimes, if it's a bloody mess because everybody's competing on price, fundamentally. I mean, that's what it turns into. It turns into a bloodbath, and people are losing money. They're in the red left and right.
Yes.
And so as business developers, we're often tasked with finding those new opportunities, those blue oceans. But I think you have to fundamentally ask yourself as a business developer, first of all, do I know the rules? Mm-hmm. And do I see them in black and white? Mm-hmm. And then second of all, I ask that question of why not? Okay, if that's the rule, Why is it that way? Why can't we do it otherwise? And that will either lead you one of two directions, into the blue ocean, or it will lead you into the black ocean. And obviously, if you're heading into the black ocean, you know, swing your rudder, okay? Swing your rudder and head back into those blue waters, because you're heading into dangerous waters there, unnavigable territory. So, so let's dig into the tactics now, Lauren. Those three fundamental tactics that you talk about in the book, and I really like how you broke them down. Is that first tactic of learn the rules. First, learn the rules. And I love the T.S. Eliot quote that you had on one page where you talk about, you have to fundamentally understand the rules before you can really win at the game. Something to that effect. So tell me what you mean by learn the rules.
So and it depends on the industry that you're in, right? There are both written rules and unwritten rules. And both of them are important, right? The written rules have the force of law generally, depending on where they're written. Some of them are not. Some of them are, corporate handbooks or whatever, but they have some enforcement mechanism more than likely. And those are really important to follow, and those are really important to find the right path within those rules. You do have to kind of stay correct and true to those rules. Although oftentimes, in the second section, we talk about how they don't actually say what you think they say sometimes and whatever, and that's where you find that space within. But then there's as important is how the game gets played, right? Those unwritten rules, kind of what we call the standard playbook, what I call the standard playbook in the book, is how everyone understands how the game gets played. And you have to understand that fairly well when you're coming into a new industry. You really do have to kind of gather all of that together, understand how people generally play the game and what the problems are if you don't play the game that way. Doesn't mean that you have to play the game that way, but you have to understand the rules fundamentally before you start kind of tweaking your space within those rules.
Yeah, I like how you draw that distinction, Lauren, where you say you have to learn the rules, and there are written rules and there are unwritten rules. And, we have a whole chapter in the business development body of knowledge. It's the first code of ethics ever created for business developers. And in there, we emphasize that all business developers must follow applicable laws and the social norms, because those social norms are essentially those unwritten rules, and they change by country, they change by culture, they change by community. And you have to understand what those are before you really start to play the game. Okay, so that's the fundamental first concept. Let's jump into this next concept of challenging the rules. This is where the fun starts.
It is.
What do you mean by challenge the rules?
So I used to joke with my staff, with particularly my BD staff, but all of the staff, and to ask the 2-year-olds questions, right? Why not? How come? Where does it say that? And so what I found very, very early, look, I came out of the rulemaking office in the White House. So I know the rules, I know where to find the rules. Inevitably, people would tell me that's against the rules. And I'm like, okay, which rule, right? And it was almost inevitably, they would say, I don't really know. That's what I've always been taught. And so when you go back to the rules, sometimes you will find that's absolutely off limits. You cannot do that, right? I cannot hire the niece of my customer to work in a role that she's not qualified for. That's against the rules. No matter what you do, that's against the rules. And I can find you 5 different rules that'll say you can't do that. But inevitably, for most of the things that don't automatically hit your gut as problematic, there's probably some gray space there. And so when you look at the rules, you then turn around and say, okay, can I do this? And sometimes the answer is no, you can't do that. But sometimes if you're looking at the outcome you're going to look toward, that becomes, okay, I can't do this. I can't take this path to get there, but I can go this way and this way and this way. I can go right, left, and over the top to get to the outcome I want to, without breaking the rules. And so knowing the rules allows you to find the space to get to the outcome you want, even if not on the path that you were first expecting it to be.
Okay, that's great. So first, understand the rules, but once you do see them either in black and white, or you understand um, the social norms that may be the social rules of the game, then you challenge those rules by asking, all right, where is it in black and white? Show
Mhm.
me. Show me in the written rules
Mhm.
exactly where it says this. Um, yeah, I've been in situations where it actually says one thing and then you find another rule that says something else.
Oh, yeah.
Um, or you find something that's written in rules and it's somewhat vague. And
Mhm.
so you have these folks that will appoint themselves as supreme masters of rulemaking and social norms, and it's not based on any type of written rule or
Mhm.
even a social norm. They just happen to be the loudest voice in the room. Um,
Absolutely.
so, so, so let me ask you this. I'm sure you've been, and you were in the White House at a very junior age. I mean, you came right out of your PhD program, right
Yep.
into the White House. So,
Mhm.
you're advising, I read in the book, I mean, folks that had probably 30, 40 years more experience than you, were in
Mhm.
very senior positions at all levels of the government. I mean, you're in the White House
Yeah,
of
for
all
sure.
things. So you're dealing with some very senior people. And we have a lot of folks in our audience that are junior business developers, and that can be very daunting. You kind of had to have this not only imposter syndrome, but you have this authority complex where
Mhm.
it's, oh no, they must know a lot more than I do because they've been in this game a lot more. So I'm just curious, how did you do that? And I would say that possibly to your benefit was the fact that I think your studies at Dartmouth, your PhD specialization was in psychology. Is that correct?
It was, and I actually got to listen to the woman who coined the phrase imposter syndrome. But the funny story, and I tell it in the book, is that as she was telling that research, right? She was explaining the research. I was sitting there ducking my head because I was so concerned that the professors, all of whom were older and male, except for one, at Dartmouth, were going to figure out that I was actually the imposter. The concept of it is that you're not an imposter, but you feel like one, even though you very clearly deserve to be there. You feel like an imposter. You feel like somebody's going to discover you. I totally missed the point of the lecture and actually thought that I was really the imposter and they were going to discover me. Tony, I realized fairly early on. I think once I got to the White House, within a year or two, I realized that a lot of times the loudest voices, first of all, were the most wrong. Right, the most confident people didn't necessarily know any more than I did about what they were talking about, but that it was a signal to me that I was uncomfortable with my amount of knowledge and I had to go dig more, as opposed to that I didn't deserve to be there. Because if you're pushing hard, and I think most of us that are, type A, kind of overachieving personalities, we're pushing hard. You're supposed to be outside of your comfort zone. And so having this feeling of not being totally comfortable in what you know, that's actually meaning that you're pushing hard. You're doing the right thing. You're going to grow, but you got to be comfortable in that discomfort and recognize that most people around you, either they don't know what they're talking about any more than you do, or if they do, hopefully they're there to kind of help guide you. They're looking for the right outcomes as well, and they recognize what you're bringing to the table. And so I got really comfortable pretty early on, even in my White House days, of asking for help, asking the questions, recognizing that I brought something else to the table that was necessary, and they brought something to the table. And so I could bring my own expertise and be comfortable in not knowing everything.
And folks, right there, this is a big part of why I really enjoyed the book is you get these life lessons that go way beyond just these three fundamental rules. You kind of season the book with a lot of these elements of wisdom that can be applied in any field, but certainly within business development. And it's more than just understanding rules and how to work within the rules and move forward in rulemaking and being unruly. But it's also a lot of these wonderful anecdotal stories that help support concepts that really empower folks. And especially if you're starting off in your career, this is a wonderful book to have. If you're a parent of somebody that's starting off in a new career, I highly recommend giving them a copy of this book, because it really is empowering and it helps folks avoid the imposter syndrome. Okay, so let's jump right into then the final overarching concept, this tactic number 3 of changing the rules. Okay, you've challenged the rules and you've shown people the irrefutable evidence that either the rule is wrong, the rule does not exist, or they're wrong.
Right.
Now, how do you change those rules?
But so sometimes you get to the point where the rule isn't wrong, right? There's a rule there that is bluntly stupid. Right? It's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. A lot of them were there for good reason or bad reason at the time, right? They were there to do a certain thing, and either that thing no longer needs to be done, or it's really improper. I mean, it's holding other people back. And so it becomes, I think, particularly for those of us who have done well, incumbent upon us to look at these rules, either because they hinder us, or more importantly, because they hinder other people that are coming up behind us. They hinder them from doing something well. And so there's 2 different paths that I talk about in the book. One of them is kind of traditional advocacy, actually changing the rules, turning around now that you know what the rules are, now that you know how the rules are made, now that you know how to interpret the rules, being able to turn around and say, this rule needs to get changed, and here's the level of government that I need to advocate to get the rule changed. And I did a lot of that through the years, where I was like, hey, Congress, hey, executive branch, this rule is ridiculous. You need to change it. But I think the other piece of it, the other side of advocacy, is individual advocacy. And I call it Sherpaing. We've got mentoring, we've got sponsoring, we've got all the different pieces, being on somebody's kitchen cabinet, all of the different pieces of kind of relationship building and helping people up individually. I think that we can take it to the next level, which is actually going along with them and helping them not just do what you've done, but using your own expertise to help them take their own path and help pave that way a little bit for them. And so I think it is really incumbent upon us to help Sherpa people, certainly who look like us, right? I did lots with other women, but I think it's also important to make sure that we're Sherpaing people who don't look or think like us, who have been shut out of the game, as it were, for various reasons. And we can bring them along as well and make sure they've learned some of the lessons that we learned before we ever had to get into the game.
Yeah, this concept of advocacy is so fundamental to business development. It's actually in the first major chapter of the business development body of knowledge, where you have this Venn diagram, the overlap of the corporation, the customer, and the community.
Yes.
And
yes.
where they overlap is written right there in the graphic, advocacy. And this, folks, is a perfect demonstration of what advocacy means. And because what you draw the distinction of advocacy for the corporation and changing any rules that may be dumb or non-existent, or that are social norms that are not codified yet. That's one example of advocacy. That you also talk about this advocacy for the community, people like you who are following and building those rules for them to benefit them and to promote the entire community. And that's why at the end of the day, the official definition of business development is customer and community advocacy that creates corporate growth. That's it. Simple.
Yep.
So in a perfect way to wrap up our podcast, and let me just cover the top 3 elements of your book, Unruly. Lauren, correct me if I miss anything and I say anything out of turn, but first of all, folks, learn the rules. BD is the best game in the world. It's so much fun. You play with a lot of great people, but you have to learn the rules, the written rules and the unwritten rules. Second of all, challenge those rules if they don't make sense, or if they present themselves as an opportunity to venture into a blue ocean, not the black ocean. Stay out of the black ocean. If you can get into that blue ocean by challenging those rules, then do it. Don't feel like an imposter. Challenge them. Show people where it is in black and white, and then make that rational argument for why something should change and a rule should be deleted, should be modified, or it should actually be created. And then finally, know how to change the rules. Be an advocate for changing those rules effectively, not just for your own corporation, but for your entire community. Lauren, did I miss anything?
No, that's great. You summarized that book even better than I could, I think.
Well, it's a wonderful book. It's been displayed prominently behind you for folks that are listening. It's on her bookshelf behind her. It's called Unruly. It's available on Amazon. It was just published on 1 July, and it's already 5 stars, 20 ratings. That's pretty huge. It's a #1 new release on Amazon, and I'm sure it's going to have continued success throughout all of the publishing channels. And I get this copy of the book. It's available in Kindle, audiobook, and hardcover. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. How can folks follow you and follow your work?
I am all over the socials now. This is something that I'm doing new. I was on Facebook before. I was on LinkedIn a little bit, but now I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as Lauren Wittenberg Weiner. I've got my own website, laurenwittenbergweiner.com. I've got a newsletter that you can sign up for on that website, where I do a whole lot of writing and a whole lot of thought pieces. So you can follow me almost everywhere. You can get the book on Amazon. If you don't like Amazon for whatever reason, you can get it on any of the other, indie bookstores, as well as Barnes and Noble, as well as Books A Million, and all the different places. And yeah, I would love to engage in these conversations, because I think it really is important to have these conversations, particularly in the BD community.
Yeah, well, and I think one item that you may have missed is your podcast. You also have a podcast, is that right?
I do. I have a podcast. I forgot. I get to interview some great unruly leaders and talk about their unruly path. So, I had Stan McChrystal, who wrote the foreword to my book, which was great. I had Danny Werfel, who was the former IRS commissioner. I also have one of the most positive people I've ever met in business, Amy Martinez-Monfort of Tampa Laundry Company. So I've had a woman who is a former Mouseketeer, who uses improv in business, Carrie Getz, and all sorts of great interviews that I get to do. So Tony, I'll have to have you on as well.
Oh, well, I would be tremendously honored. And folks, that's Stanley McChrystal. That's 4-star General Stanley McChrystal. So listen to Lauren's podcast. They have some real powerhouse guests on that podcast, and folks that you can learn about. Just an amazing lineup. And Lauren, you've been amazing. You've been on fire the entire time and absolutely unruly.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Business Development Podcast. Join our free community of corporate partners and business development professionals advancing the art, science, and ethics of the business development profession at gbdassociation.org.